also the last day of free April for Pluralsight. And so if you missed out on that, reach out to a Pluralsight author and ask if they have access to a 30-day pass, because we usually do. As long as they let us have 30-day passes, we can share those out. So what I've done for the last, I think today's day 22, but I've done this every day since the beginning of the month, is I have shared my thoughts on a specific topic from my courses. Mostly that's one course a day, but there were a couple of 2 or 3 days where I had multiple courses on the same topic. And so today we're rounding it off. Actually, tomorrow we're going to talk about, let me look real quick. Tomorrow we're talking about a really cool topic, customer service for software developers. So not how to do customer service, but how to have a mentality that is customer-centric, customer-oriented. Today, we're going to talk about understanding your audience. And so this is a course that I did recently. It was October of 2019. It's one of my newer courses, so it looks good. And it's shorter. It's actually about as long as I like. It's an hour and a half long. This was my sweet spot where I could feel like I, could share everything that I wanted to share. This course was really cool. So as I was putting this together, actually, as I was pitching this course to Pluralsight, and they're like, well, why are you the expert in this? Why should people listen to you? And my thought was, immediately I went back to the boardroom back up in Idaho when I was starting out my career, finished school, and I think I'd finished my MBA, or I was in MBA classes. I was on the, eventually I was on a board, and I was in an executive committee, and I was doing presentations a lot to the board. And as I start the course, I talk about, this is going to tie back in, what is your audience, or who is defining your audience, right? Who is your audience? So I really thought a lot about, when I was doing this course, I was thinking a lot about the executives in the boardroom. And the message that I wanted them to walk away with, right? Which sometimes we have a message we want to share, which is not the message that we really need them to walk away with. You know what I mean? So sometimes we're emotionally invested in something, and we're like, and another thing, and you need to know this, and here's where you were wrong, and here's where I was right, and you need to acknowledge that. And all you really want, your objective from that meeting, is like one thing, right? And so it's important, I think, that we understand what our objective is, what we want out of the meeting. And sometimes our objective is that we're heard, right? But a lot of times that doesn't make sense, not in relationships, not in businesses. Like, it makes sense for us, and it's something that we need. But, being heard in meetings leads to you becoming known as the drama queen, or someone who doesn't know how to be effective in a meeting, or waste my time in a meeting, right? So think about what your objectives are. I remember when I first started working at that organization, I think it was, 4 or 5 years earlier, and I was in meetings with the CFO a lot, and I reported directly to the CFO. And because I was the first on-site IT person in the organization, I got dragged into a lot of meetings, which was really fun. I really enjoyed that, because they talk a lot about strategy and execution and stuff like that. And I remember being in these meetings that were pretty intense. The outcomes of the meetings were far-reaching, and my boss was always so chill. He was so calm. He was also very focused on the outcome. So he was really nice, and you never felt disrespected. You felt listened to. But even if the conversation kind of went off topic a little bit, and joking or whatever it was, he always had this gentle way of bringing it back and making sure that by the end of this meeting, we were going to accomplish our objectives, or the objectives that he had in mind. This guy was in meetings. I remember he would come into work at like 6 in the morning, and he would leave around 6:30 in the evening. Most people would roll in around 8 and leave by 5. And he told me once, he says, I get my work done between 6 and 8 and 5 and 6:30. But between 8 and 5, he was in meetings all day long. And it was really easy for, as you know, you've been in meetings where they just kind of get away from you and you don't accomplish anything. So he really had to focus on what his objectives of the meetings were and really understand who he was talking to or with. So at the beginning of this module, when I talk about what is your audience and defining your audience, I say, whether you're talking to executives or customers or team members, people who you report to, people who report to you, people that are in a completely different team. So there's a weird power authority struggle because it might be a colleague where neither of you have more authority to kind of lay down the law. And I'm not saying that's an effective way of communication, but I know it's done a lot where people are like, well, this is my title, this is my swim lane, this is my jurisdiction, this is how we're going to do it, right? And so I talk about all these different audiences and the importance of understanding your message. So let me just walk through real quick what is in the course. But I wanted to kind of give that perspective of when I was thinking about this course. I definitely thought about my customers. I thought about my users on Jibber Jobber and my viewers on Pluralsight and my audience members when I am on stage. Or just a couple of weeks ago, I did a online meeting for about 60 job seekers in the DC area. And I think about who is in that audience. And honestly, the message that I have and the objective that I have might be the same or similar, but depending on who I'm talking to, I'm going to deliver it in a completely different way. So in the first module, it's called Communicating Better Because You Understand the Audience. And we have 3 parts of effective communication. What is your audience? The results of understanding your audience, defining your audience, and describing the messenger. Okay, so that's the first module, just kind of introduction to really communication. This is about outbound. A lot of it's outbound communication, but of course, we can't understand our audience without listening and observing, right? Okay, the second module is understanding communication from marketing's perspective. I thought this was really important to include in this module because if you think about all the functions in an organization that is really, really keen on understanding an audience. I mean, obviously product and UX, that's what they do. They need to understand the audience, but they also might come back and dictate what the audience needs, or decipher what the information they're gathering and then say, well, this is the result of it. That I think Steve Jobs was an excellent example of that, where you have all these companies doing all kinds of UX research and stuff like that, and Steve Jobs is like, well, we don't need a power button, or we don't need all these things. This is what the user really wants, right? And so he was one to think and intuitively figure out what the world would want. And man, was he right? It's pretty amazing. But we're not Steve Jobs, right? And so where do we learn how to most effectively understand who our audience is? And I thought, well, let's go to marketing, because those people are, you kind of think marketing is a fun bunch of people, and there are fun people in marketing, but there are also completely introverted number nerds who all they do is analyze and statistics and stuff like that. So I wanted to throw this flavoring in of what do professional marketers do to understand who the audience is. So I go in and talk about demographics, and then the next module is on psychographics. And you look, there's 3 minutes on demographics and double on psychographics. This was really an interesting idea to me. So of course, you know what demographics are. These are basically the idea of, how old are you? What's your race or nationality or gender or, religion? What are things that I can timestamp about you right now? And it's funny because marketing's allowed to do this, but HR isn't, right? HR will ask some of these questions and I don't even know what they use it for, but if we talk about some of these things in a work environment or an interview or something like that, it could become a lawsuit, right? But marketing is like, give me all that information, tell me what. And then what they do is they say, okay, if you are 50 years old and you are of this religious persuasion and you live in this area and you make this much money, these are all demographic data points, then you must want to buy this thing, or you must think this way, or something like that. And that's cool. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. I think we could get some good information from that. But as you know, when we stereotype and categorize and generalize like that, there's a lot of opportunity for mistakes, right? Like we could find that person that fits all of those data points and say, well, you must be this way or think this way. And they don't. Like they could be an anomaly, right? Or we could just be wrong on our assumptions. So demographics, they're data points. Take them in, take whatever you can, let that help massage what your conclusions are, but they're not necessarily going to give you the entire picture, okay? You need to gather more data points. And this is where psychographics really comes in to help. Psychographics is a really cool concept where instead of saying, how old are you? Because your age is going to help me determine your buying preferences, okay? And this is where we get in, in pop culture right now, we have the okay boomer. Well, if you're a boomer, if you're a baby boomer, then you're dumb. That's really what okay boomer is saying. Karen is an older white woman. And if you're Karen, then you're ignorant and you're selfish. And I mean, all these generalizations and stereotypes, you can see how we can get in a lot of trouble with even demographics, even fleshed out demographics, right? Psychographics comes in and they basically say, what have you done in the past? Like, what have your behaviors been? What has your thinking been? Have you ever bought these things, and why? Or why did you choose this type of car over that type of car? Do you consume media, and how and where and why? Psychographics gets away from that demographic data point and starts to try and understand how you've made decisions and why you make decisions and what your thought process are. And if you can imagine in these 9 minutes where I talk about the demographics and the psychographics and putting them all together, now we have the ability to say, okay, this person is this old, they live in this place, here's their religion, here's their race, and here's their past behavior. They voted this way, they bought that thing, they took that class. Whatever those behavioral things are, now you start putting those two things together and you have a much better idea of who your audience is. Now, I'm not doing demographics and psychographics on my board meeting, right? Like the 4 or 5 other people that I meet with, it's not, it doesn't make sense to do that unless I'm new to the board or new to the team or meeting or whatever, new to the group. But generally, I already know these people enough, and I don't need to do the demographic psychographic thing. But as a software developer, when I'm thinking about my product and who my audience is, who my customers would be, I really do want to understand those things. I want to understand not only what their current situation is, or any of those demographic points, but I want to understand how and why they've purchased things before. For example, in Jibberjobber, a lot of people that come to Jibberjobber, so Jibberjobber is a CRM for job seekers. A lot of people that come to Jibberjobber are kind of do-it-yourselfers. They haven't necessarily hired a coach or hired a resume writer. They're going out online and learning how to do all that stuff on their own. They've created an Excel spreadsheet that doesn't work for them, right? It works for the first week or two, but the more they get into networking and applying and interviewing and all this data, lots of data that they're collecting, the spreadsheet just doesn't work, right? So we have this group who is a do-it-yourself type, and the do-it-yourselfers are like, I'm not going to pay for that. I would rather build my own, right? So I'll build my own spreadsheet or I'll build my own whatever. And so that's a certain demographic. Now, there's another very interesting demographic when career coaches come to me and say, Jason, I have this executive client who wants to get on Jibberjobber, but they don't want to enter anything. So first of all, money's not an issue, right? So the first group that I just mentioned, money's an issue. They are very price sensitive and they don't want to spend $60 for the year. The other group is like, it's only $60. I sneeze and sneeze out more than $60, you know, like $60 is nothing to me. What they're concerned about is their time. They don't want to spend time going in and getting all their contacts from LinkedIn into Jibber-Jobber or Outlook or Gmail into Jibber-Jobber. They don't want to spend time taking their stack of business cards and putting that into Jibber-Jobber, right? They have a completely different way that they make decisions and have made decisions in the past. And one thing that I think about when I think about an executive is, when you're an executive and you have a problem, how do you solve the problem? You buy your way out of the problem. It's not your money, it's the company's money. But if you've had a career where you're buying your way out of problems, you're hiring experts, you're bringing in consultants, you're growing your team, you're buying marketing research, you know, all that stuff that you've done in your career. And now when you're out on your own, you're like, okay, how much money would it take to get rid of this problem? That's a mindset that this different audience is dealing with. All right, so these are conclusions that we get to when we talk about the demographics and the psychographics especially. By the way, in the course, I invite people to leave in the comments ideas of psychographic questions specific to them. And it's really interesting. It's really fun to see a lot of software developers, but people who are figuring out who their audience is and put what psychographic questions might be. Okay, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you've been alive for over 20 years, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was actually just at a conference where somebody was like, don't even talk to me about Maslow's hierarchy of needs because that doesn't matter. And I thought it was really interesting. When I was in my job search in 2006, I had my basic needs met. I wasn't meeting them. Other people were meeting them for me, right? So people chipped in to help figure out how I was going to pay mortgage and bills and stuff like that. So we never went to bed hungry, and we were never at risk of losing our house because there was a contingency plan in place. But man, I didn't like it. I like to be self-sufficient and I wanted to do it on my own. So I had my needs met, but I remember a feeling of drowning. And I'll go back to when I lived at a house that had a swimming pool, and you'd be under the water. Let's say you throw something at the deep end and you dive down to pick it up. You didn't get enough breath. And so you go all the way down and you're coming up and you can see the top of the water, but your lungs are bursting. And you're like, I don't know if I can make it to the top. And you force yourself to make it to the top, but it's scary and it's uncomfortable. And that's how I remember being in the early stages of my job search. I could feel it, I could see it, but I wasn't there, right? And it was just scary and it was uncomfortable. And here's what happens when you're drowning like that. You don't think about, so in the hierarchy of needs, you know, basics are down here at the bottom, which includes like food and shelter and clothing. And then as you progress up, you have like these things that almost like art, things that aren't really, some people are going to hate this, but things that aren't like critical to live. It's not like draw my last breath. Okay. So, but they beautify us. They beautify the world. They enrich our lives and stuff like that. When you're figuring out that bottom level of needs, you can't even think about the top. You know, someone's like, oh, and that art show. And it's like, I don't even know where I'm sleeping tonight. I'm not thinking about art. I'm thinking about, are my kids going to eat in the next 24 hours, right? So I know it's really basic, and this has been around, I think, since the 60s or something. It's been around forever, but it is really critical. So where does this come in? Where's your audience in the hierarchy? Because if your audience is way up here at the top, you have a different message than people that are way down here at the bottom. And I'm not talking about their ability to earn money, or whether they're smart or not. I'm talking about what their needs are right now that is preoccupying their mind. I'll give you an example. I never think about oxygen. I don't. I have an abundance of oxygen, and I'm lucky enough to have the health right now where I don't have to wear an oxygen, tubes. I don't have to be on oxygen. I don't have to have a CPAP machine like that. I just don't think about oxygen. I get to think about other stuff, right? But the people who are on oxygen, and I've been around people on oxygen, they have to think about oxygen all the time. Where's their cord? Is it kinked? Is their tank? When is their tank going to run out? When are they going to be able to get a replacement? Like that preoccupies them. And so what I'm saying is, with the hierarchy of needs, is you have to understand where your audience is so that you can address them at the right time. There's a lot of companies right now during the COVID-19 pandemic that are trying to address your lowest needs on the hierarchy. It's really hard to talk to somebody about something that is a not necessary thing to a bunch of people who are at the end. They're at the end. They're at the end of their rope, their financial rope, their sanity rope, right? All right, cognitive biases. And I actually just saw this morning or last night, I saw a whole course on cognitive biases. I don't remember what it's called, but if you go in and search Pluralsight for cognitive or bias, you'll probably find it. This was a fascinating study. I only spent 4 minutes on it. I easily could have spent a whole day on cognitive biases. When people have cognitive biases, they could be at a point where they won't listen to what you're saying, or they won't believe it, or they won't hear it, right? So you have to understand how cognitive biases plays in. The example that I give in the course is, I'm going to talk to somebody and they're nodding their head the whole time. And then when I say, okay, are you going to do it? And they're like, nope. And I'm like, well, do you agree with everything I said? And they're like, yeah, everything you said, perfect. Why aren't you going to do it? And they're like, well, because of da da da. That's a cognitive bias. And if we understand cognitive biases, it helps us be less surprised in the moment when it's happening, because it's really shocking to have a conversation and have cognitive bias take over. But it can also help us, if we can prepare, it can help us understand how to appropriately react to cognitive biases and talk around the issues of cognitive biases. All right, talk about your message and then the context of culture. The next module is how to practice effective communication. So what I really want to do, I don't know if you've caught this in my courses, and I do this in my presentations. What I really want to do mostly is I want to wrap your brain around a concept, or introduce a new concept, or help you see a concept in a different way. Like I want to change how you understand and view things. And then I want to give you actionable tactics that you can start working on right now. I mean, it's great if you walk away from my course or my session or whatever, and you're like, man, that was so awesome. It's so inspiring. I'm going to do stuff. And I like that. I like inspiring people. And I like it when you walk away thinking that you're going to change. But I also want to give you things, specific next steps that you can do. And if you go back and look at all my courses, you'll see that's my pattern. Introduce you to ideas and concepts, maybe a different way to look at ideas and concepts, and then give you actionable things that you can do right now. And some of those actionable things might seem a little hokey, like that's really no big deal. I mean, I knew that, but it's not about knowing it. It's about actually doing it, and doing it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, and mastering that and figuring that out. So that's what this, that's where we're going to in this module, how to practice effective communication. So creating audience profiles, we're actually walking through the process of developing a profile for your audience or audiences. Is that audience-I? Performing message analysis, connecting the message with your audience. So you got your audience profile and your message, and then how do you put those two together, making sure that they're a good match or fit. emotions in communication, and then finally speaking through filters to get your message across clearly. So I talk about filters of expectations, filters of points of reference, and filters of experiences. And the idea here is, we all come from background, the way we learn, the way we were brought up, the expectations that we have because of experiences, these all become filters. Okay. So, for example, if I go to a conference and every time I've gone to this conference, the speakers generally stink, so I'm not going for the speakers, I'm going for the networking and maybe for the food. But I don't have any high expectations from the speakers. And then they bring in a speaker that just knocks my sock off. They talk to my soul, right? The message is for me. The message is amazing. The delivery is amazing. I had an expectation, which was my filter, of nothing, of being disappointed again. But that filter was crushed. And so when I am talking about these filters in the Understanding Your Audience course, my message is, how do we make it so that people who come in, for example, let me stereotype, somebody who comes in from the inner city where it's pretty rough life, right? And you're watching your back all the time. Somebody comes in with those filters is going to be different than somebody who comes in from a very rural environment, who's going to have different filters than somebody coming in from Europe, who's going to have different filters than somebody coming in from Asia. So I actually, over the last 14 years, I've done a lot of outsourcing of jibber jobber projects, and I've had people from around the world. And it's very interesting to me to understand those filters that I get with people from the Philippines versus people from Latin America versus people from India. And I know that that's stereotyping, because not everybody from India is represented by the 2 or 3 Indians that I hired, right? And not everybody from the Philippines is going to have the same work ethic, be it good or bad, than the 5 or 10 Filipinos that I've hired, right? But these are filters that I've created, even to the point where I'm like, I need to hire a new person. This is the country that I want to go to, or this is the type of person that I want to go to. I need to hire a salesperson. I love older people. I love older salespeople. I really do. That's a filter that has been created throughout my career. So anyways, filtering is powerful. And the reason why we're talking about it here is because you need to think about, at least, and hopefully try and understand what the filters are that your audience might have, because you need to understand how you're being filtered. And you might even have to counter those filters. So anyways, that is it. The Understanding Your Audience course, one of my more favorite courses, because it applies to me as a speaker, to me as a Pluralsight presenter. It applies to me as a product manager for Jibber Jobber. It applies to me as a dad and a husband. Like, the more I understand people, the better I can communicate with them and have a richer relationship. So with that, go check it out. You can find any of my courses by going to Pluralsight and just searching Alba. This one is Understanding Your Audience. Free April ends today. If you're looking for a 30-day pass, hit me up. I might be able to hook you up. And with that, I'm out. Thanks for joining us.